Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES horizon and looked at the massive screen showing the Galactic Council chambers. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the Great Hall. Their strange faces and bodies created a sea of colors and shapes that had once fascinated him. Now they just made him tired. He held the datapad in his hands and felt its weight. Such a small thing to carry such huge news. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. They knew what was coming. The whole ship knew. Maybe the whole galaxy would know soon enough. The Zephyrian ambassador HFY called for order with his forearms waving. His blue skin looked darker than usual under the chamber lights. The Council recognizes Captain Morrison of Earth Fleet. Command. Jake stepped forward and activated his transmission. His image appeared on screens across thousands of worlds. Billions of beings would hear these words. He cleared his throat and began to read. Citizens of the galaxy, he said in a steady voice. For 312 years, humanity has served as peacekeepers and mediators for the galactic community. We have prevented wars, stopped genocides, and maintained stability across the known worlds. Today that service ends. A rumble of confusion spread through the chamber. The Corvan delegate stood up on his 6 legs and clicked his mandibles rapidly. The Thessian representative flashed warning colors across her scaled skin. Even the usually calm Aquarians began to whisper among themselves. Jake continued without pause. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from all galactic affairs. We will no longer intervene in conflicts, provide aid, or participate in diplomatic relations. Earth and all human colonies are now closed borders. This decision is final. HFY rose from his seat, his voice booming across the chamber. Captain Morrison, you cannot simply abandon your duties. The Treaty of Unity Station binds humanity to this council for another century. What is the meaning of this action? Jake looked directly into the camera. Behind those words, he could hear 3 centuries of expectation. 3 centuries of other species assuming humans would always be there to fix their problems. 3 centuries of taking human sacrifice for granted. Ambassador, you ask what this means, Jake said quietly. It means we are tired of being your conscience. We are tired of stopping wars that you start. We are tired of solving problems you create and do not want to fix yourselves. Most of all, we are tired of being blamed when our solutions are not perfect. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The hegemony chancellor pounded his massive fists on his podium. This is betrayal of the highest order, he roared. Humanity has obligations to the galaxy. Jake smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Obligations, he repeated. Tell me, Chancellor, when was the last time your people thanked a human diplomat for preventing your war with the outer colonies? When did any of you ask what keeping your peace cost us? He paused and looked across the chamber at faces that showed confusion, anger, and the first hints of fear. You never asked because you never cared. We were useful, so you used us. That time is over. The Aquarian Prime speaker rose gracefully from her floating platform. Her voice was like music when she spoke. Surely humanity does not mean to abandon all the good work we have done together. The galaxy needs your wisdom, your compassion, your unique perspective on conflict resolution. Our wisdom? Jake laughed and the sound was bitter. Prime Speaker, do you know what human children learn in school? About the galaxy. They learn that their parents might die keeping peace between species who will hate them for interfering. They learn that being human means carrying everyone else's burdens. They learn that no good deed goes unpunished when you do it for people who do not want to be helped. He set the datapad aside and spoke from memory. 3 days ago, I received a report from our embassy on Corvan Prime. Ambassador Helen Parker was assassinated by Corvan extremists who claimed she was interfering with their culture. She was there helping to set up refugee camps for victims of your civil war. She left behind 2 children who will never see their mother again because she believed in galactic peace. The chamber fell silent. Even the translator devices seemed to pause. Jake continued. Helen was the 14th human diplomat killed this year, not by enemies in war, but by the very people we were trying to help. And still you demand we stay. Still you expect us to sacrifice our people for your causes? On Earth, Dr. Lisa Harper stood in the command center of the Global Evacuation Protocol. Screens around her showed human ships leaving colonies throughout the galaxy. The process had been planned for years. Every human settlement had secret evacuation procedures. Every diplomatic station had ships ready to depart at a moment's notice. "Status report," she called to her team. Lieutenant Commander Tony Mitchell replied from his station. "Outer Rim colonies are clear. Core world embassies have begun withdrawal. Deep space research stations are powering down." Lisa nodded and activated her comm unit. "All stations, this is Control. Execute Protocol Exodus. All human personnel return to designated safe zones immediately. No exceptions." Across the galaxy, humans began to disappear. Medical stations that had served alien colonies for decades went dark. Trade posts that had connected distant worlds fell silent. Research facilities that had shared human knowledge with grateful species sealed their doors and launched into the void. The evacuations were not panicked or desperate. They were methodical, careful, and complete. Humans had learned to plan for everything, including the day they might need to leave. Back in the council chamber, Jake watched the alien representatives argue among themselves. Their voices rose higher as they realized what was happening. Ships were leaving. Bases were closing. The humans were really going. "You cannot do this," Kethvar shouted. "The Corvin Thessian situation requires immediate mediation. Without human intervention, there will be war." Jake picked up his data pad again. "Ambassador, that is no longer our problem. You have been managing your own conflicts for thousands of years before humans reached the stars. I am sure you can remember how. But the casualties," the Thessian delegate whispered. "The suffering will be your responsibility," Jake said firmly. "As it should have been all along." He looked one last time at the council chamber, at beings who had ruled star empires before Earth invented the wheel, at species who had crossed galactic distances before humans discovered fire, at civilizations older than human history who somehow could not solve their own problems without human help. "Good luck," he said, and cut the transmission. The UES Horizon turned away from the council station and jumped to hyperspace. Behind them, the galaxy faced its future alone for the first time in 3 centuries. And in the great chamber, representatives of 1,000 worlds finally understood what silence sounded like. 2 years had passed since the first shots were fired at Kepler station, and the galaxy was burning. What had started as a mining dispute between 2 species had spread like a virus through the star systems. The Third Corvin Thessian War now encompassed 47 different worlds and showed no signs of stopping. Ambassador Tony Mitchell stood at the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched the refugee ships arrive. His was the last human colony that maintained any contact with alien species. Even that contact was limited to humanitarian aid and basic trade. The Human Colonial Council had voted to maintain New Geneva as an observation post to monitor galactic events. The ships coming to New Geneva were not the sleek vessels of prosperous civilizations. They were converted cargo haulers packed with families fleeing the war zones. Emergency life support systems strained to keep their passengers alive during the long journey to neutral space. Some ships did not make it at all. Tony's communication board chimed with another desperate message. This one came from Nexari Prime Minister Kel Oshan. The Nexari had been allies of humanity for over a century. They were a peaceful species that specialized in art and philosophy. Now their homeworld was caught between advancing Corvin fleets and Thessian attack squadrons. Ambassador Mitchell. The Prime Minister's message began, "The Nexari people face extinction. Our cities burn while our children hide in underground shelters. We beg you to ask Earth for help. Surely humanity will not allow an entire species to be wiped out for a war they did not start." Tony had received similar messages every day for the past 6 months. The hegemony chancellor offered tribute if humans would protect their trade routes. The Aquarian Collective begged for medical assistance as refugee camps overwhelmed their resources. Even the proud Zephyrians had quietly asked if humanity might consider limited intervention. The answer was always the same. No. Tony composed his response with a heavy heart. "Prime Minister, I am deeply sorry for your people's suffering. But humanity's position has not changed. We will accept refugees at New Geneva, but we cannot intervene in the conflict. I urge you to seek mediation through the remaining neutral worlds. He knew the response was inadequate. The remaining neutral worlds were too weak to stop a war of this magnitude. The Galactic Council had dissolved 6 months ago, when the Zephyrian Federation itself split into warring factions. There was no authority left that could broker peace between species that no longer trusted each other. On Earth, President Helen Carter stood in the Global Command Center and reviewed the latest intelligence reports from New Geneva. The news was worse every week. Advanced civilizations that had existed for millennia were collapsing within months. Species that had mastered faster than light travel were losing the ability to maintain their technology as wars consumed their educated populations. The Aquarian Collective has fragmented into 7 separate governments, reported Director Maria Santos from the Peace Archive Division. 3 of those governments are now at war with each other. The species that gave us our understanding of quantum mathematics is destroying itself over religious differences. President Carter rubbed her temples where a headache had been building for days. What about the Nexari situation, Nexari Prime? Will fall within the month, General Paul Rivera answered grimly. The Corvins have surrounded the system and the Thessians are too busy defending their own worlds to help. We estimate the entire species will be extinct within a year. And we are going to do nothing, Carter said. It was not a question. General. Rivera shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Madam President, the military is ready to intervene if you give the order. We could have peacekeeping forces in the Nexari system within a week. And then, what, Paul? We stop this war, and another one starts, somewhere else. We become the galaxy's police force again, and watch our people die for beings who will blame us no matter what we do. Director Santos activated her holographic display and showed the assembled leaders a series of charts and graphs. The Peace Archive Division has been analyzing the psychological cost of our previous peacekeeping operations. What we found was disturbing. The charts showed suicide rates among human diplomats that were 30 times the galactic average. Mental health statistics revealed an entire generation of humans suffering from what psychologists called species dysphoria. The crushing weight of being responsible for the survival of civilizations that never asked for that responsibility. Our peacekeepers were dying inside long before they died in the field. Santos continued. We were creating a culture where being human meant sacrificing everything for others. Our children were learning that their lives mattered less than alien conflicts they had no part in creating. President Carter studied the data with growing sadness. How many of our people died in peacekeeping operations over the last century? 43,000 military personnel, General Rivera replied. But that number does not include civilian diplomats, medical personnel, or support staff. The real number is closer to 70,000. 70,000 humans dead to keep the peace for species that outnumber us 1,000,000 to 1, Carter said quietly. And they never even thanked us for it. The door to the command center opened and Admiral Kate Sullivan entered. She had returned from the isolation fleet to brief the leadership on the galaxy's current situation. Her uniform was crisp, but her face showed the strain of commanding humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs. Admiral, what is your assessment of the situation? President Carter asked. Admiral Sullivan activated her datapad and projected a galactic map on the room's main screen. Red zones marked areas of active conflict. Yellow zones showed regions of instability. Green zones indicated areas that remained peaceful. The map was mostly red and yellow. The galaxy has lost approximately 30% of its total population to war, famine, and social collapse, Sullivan reported in a steady voice. Interstellar trade has dropped by 70%. Scientific research has virtually stopped as resources are diverted to military production. At current rates, we estimate total civilizational collapse within 5 years, Jesus General Rivera whispered. The Corvin-Thessian War is spreading faster than anyone predicted, Sullivan continued. But that is not the worst part. Species are losing the cultural knowledge that allowed them to reach the stars in the first place. The Zephyrians have forgotten how to maintain their fusion reactors. The hegemony is reverting to pre-spaceflight tribalism. Even the Aquarians are embracing totalitarian regimes that promise order through oppression. President Carter stared at the red zones on the map. Each one represented billions of lives lost or destroyed. And there is nothing we can do to stop it. There is something we could do, Admiral Sullivan said quietly. But it would require us to become what we were afraid of becoming. We could take control of the galaxy by force, install human governments on every world, rule through military might instead of diplomatic persuasion. It would end the wars and make us tyrants, Carter replied. Yes. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity could save the galaxy, but only by enslaving it. They could stop the wars, but only by becoming the very thing they had fought against for centuries. On New Geneva, Tony Mitchell received another message from Dr. Greg Coleman on Haven. Greg had been documenting the collapse of galactic civilization for 2 years now. His reports had become increasingly desperate as he watched species that had existed for thousands of years destroy themselves in mere months. Tony. Greg's message began, I have been analyzing the cultural changes happening across the galaxy. What I am seeing is not just war. It is the complete breakdown of everything that made these species capable of interstellar civilization. They are not just forgetting how to maintain peace. They are forgetting how to think beyond their immediate survival needs. The message continued with data that made Tony's blood run cold. Species were abandoning scientific research. Educational systems were collapsing as resources went to military production. Art and philosophy were being replaced by propaganda and hate. The galaxy is not just dying, Tony. It is forgetting how to live, and I think that might have been humanity's greatest gift to them. We did not just keep the peace. We kept the idea that peace was possible. Without that idea, they are reverting to something darker than they were before they reached the stars. Tony forwarded the message to Earth and included his own assessment. The galaxy needs more than peacekeepers. It needs hope. And right now, humanity is the only species that remembers what hope looks like. But on Earth, the leaders of humanity faced an impossible choice. They could save the galaxy by conquering it or watch it die while preserving their own souls. Either way, the price would be measured in blood, and the currency would be human lives. In the darkness between stars, human ships waited for orders that might never come while the galaxy tore itself apart, learning the difference between peace and the absence of war. 6 months had passed since the last human ship left Galactic Council space. The great chamber that once echoed with Captain Morrison's final words now hosted angry debates that led nowhere. Today, the Corvan Empire and Thessian Republic faced each other across the council floor like predators ready to strike. Chancellor Vex Korth of the Corvan Empire stood on his powerful hind legs and slammed his clawed hands on the speaking podium. The Thessian Republic has violated mining rights in the Kepler sector for the last time. They steal our resources and claim it is legal salvage. Prime Minister Yala Esh of the Thessian Republic hissed through her scaled throat and flashed warning colors across her skin. The Corvans abandoned those mining sites decades ago. Thessian law states that abandoned claims become free salvage after 10 standard years. Corvan law states no such thing, Vex Korth roared. Those mines belong to the Empire regardless of their current operational status. In the past, this argument would have lasted maybe an hour. A human mediator would have stepped between the two sides and found a solution. Commander Ryan Foster had handled 12 similar disputes in the last 5 years alone. He would have suggested profit-sharing agreements or neutral zone mining rights. He would have reminded both sides that war cost more than compromise. But Commander Foster was gone. All the humans were gone. Kethvar of the Zephyrian Federation tried to fill the role the humans had left empty. Perhaps we could establish a joint commission to review the mining rights. Both sides could present their claims to a neutral panel. Neutral panel. Vex Korth laughed, and the sound was like grinding metal. Who exactly would serve on this panel, Zephyrian? Your people who trade with both our empires. The Aquarians who need our resources to power their world ships. The hegemony who wants to claim the sector for themselves. Yala Esh coiled her long neck and spoke in a voice dripping with contempt. At least the Zephyrians are trying to help, unlike the Corvins who only know how to threaten and demand. Threaten. Vexkorth stepped forward and his bodyguards moved with him. You want to see a threat, reptile? Keep stealing from the Empire and you will learn what Corvin justice looks like. The Thessian delegation rose as one, their scales flashing bright red in unison. It was a war display that had not been seen in the council chambers for centuries. The Corvin guards responded by drawing their energy weapons. Order, Kethvar shouted, but his voice lacked the authority that human mediators had possessed. We must maintain civilized discourse, but civility was breaking down across the galaxy. Without human oversight, old hatreds bubbled to the surface like poison from infected wounds. Species that had cooperated for generations remembered ancient grudges. Trade disputes became territorial claims. Cultural differences became excuses for violence. The Corvin Empire acted first. 3 days after the council meeting their battle, fleets surrounded the disputed mining facilities in the Kepler sector. They did not attack immediately. Instead, they sent a message to all Thessian ships in the area. Leave now or be destroyed. The Thessians had their own fleet nearby. Captain Zara Vel commanded the Republican Guard, and she was not known for backing down from threats. She ordered her ships to form a defensive line around the mining stations. Corvin vessels, she broadcast on all frequencies. You are in violation of Republic space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. For 6 hours, the two fleets faced each other in the darkness of space. Weapon systems charged, shields powered up, crews prepared for battle. In the past, a human peacekeeping ship would have arrived before shots were fired. Ambassador Kate Sullivan would have negotiated a ceasefire. Captain Morrison would have found a way for both sides to save face while stepping back from disaster. But the humans were gone. The first shot came from a nervous Corvin gunner who thought he saw a Thessian torpedo launch. His plasma cannon lit up the void and struck a Republican mining platform. The structure exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from 3 star systems away. Captain Zara Vel did not hesitate. All ships attack. Show these insects what happens when they murder civilians. The Battle of Kepler Station lasted 18 hours. When it was over, 12 ships had been destroyed and over 4,000 beings were dead. The mining facilities that both sides had fought over were nothing but radioactive debris drifting in space. But the war was just beginning. On the abandoned human research station, Alpha 7 alien scavenger teams picked through the databanks that humans had left behind. Most of the files were encrypted or written in languages they could not read, but some information remained accessible to those who knew where to look. Velthara was a linguist from the Aquarian Collective. She had studied human writing systems for decades and could read their files better than most. What she found in the station computers made her tentacles curl with shock. The humans had not just been good at stopping wars. They had predicted them. File after file contained detailed analysis of every major species in the galaxy, psychological profiles that mapped exactly how each culture would respond to different types of pressure, economic models that showed which trade disputes would lead to violence, social studies that identified the exact cultural triggers that could turn allies into enemies. By the deep currents, Velthara whispered as she read through a file labeled Corvin-Thessian Conflict Probability. The humans had predicted this exact war 3 years ago. They had even identified which mining dispute would trigger it and how long it would take for violence to spread to neighboring systems. She found similar files for dozens of other potential conflicts. The Zephyrian Civil War that human observers had stopped 5 years ago was predicted in perfect detail. The hegemony trade crisis that Ambassador Foster had resolved was mapped out like a chess game with all possible moves calculated in advance. The humans had not just been peacekeepers. They had been playing a game with the entire galaxy as their board, and they had been winning because they understood the rules better than anyone else. Velthara sent a message to her government on Aquaria Prime. The humans were not naive idealists, as we believed. They were the most sophisticated political analysts in galactic history. They knew exactly what would happen when they left. On the neutral world of Haven, Dr. Greg Coleman sat in his small apartment and watched the news feeds with growing horror. Haven was one of the few worlds where humans were still allowed to remain. It had been designated as neutral territory centuries ago, and maintained that status through careful diplomacy. Greg had been an anthropologist studying alien cultures for 30 years. He had chosen to stay behind when the evacuation began because someone needed to document what happened next. Now he was beginning to regret that decision. The Corvinthesian War was spreading faster than anyone had imagined. The outer spiral colonies were choosing sides based on old trade relationships. The inner worlds were closing their borders to refugees. Species that had lived in peace for generations were suddenly stockpiling weapons and building defense fleets. Greg activated his communication array and sent a message to the human fleet, somewhere in dark space. He knew Admiral Kate Sullivan was in command of the isolation fleet, but he did not know where they were hiding. Kate, this is Greg Coleman on Haven. The situation out here is worse than we expected. The war is spreading and civilian casualties are mounting. Maybe it is time to reconsider the withdrawal. The reply came 3 days later. Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on his screen and her expression was cold as space ice. Greg, we tried to teach them for 3 centuries. They preferred to see us as useful tools rather than understand what maintaining peace actually required. This is the price of their choice. But Kate, people are dying. Entire species might be wiped out. People were dying before Greg. The only difference is that now, human diplomats are not dying with them. Our children are not growing up knowing they might sacrifice their lives for beings who will hate them for trying to help. Greg stared at the screen after the transmission ended. Outside his window, he could see smoke rising from the Haven spaceport. Even this neutral world was feeling the effects of galactic instability as refugee ships arrived daily and supplies grew scarce. For the first time since the evacuation began, Greg Coleman wondered if the humans had made the right choice. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, and he was trapped in the middle watching it happen. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the human fleet waited and watched and did nothing, while the galaxy learned what peace actually cost. 8 years had passed since humanity walked away from the galaxy when the impossible happened. A signal reached Earth from the ruins of Zephyrian space. It was weak and distorted but unmistakably real. Someone was still alive out there and they were calling for humanity. President Helen Carter stood in the Global Communications Center as technicians worked to clean up the transmission. The signal had taken months to reach Earth, traveling through the electromagnetic storms that now raged across former galactic trade routes. What they finally heard made the entire room fall silent. The voice belonged to Keth Var, the Zephyrian ambassador who had demanded explanations on that final day 8 years ago. But this was not the proud, confident leader who had once commanded respect across the galaxy. This was the broken voice of someone who had watched his entire species die. People of Earth. The transmission began. This is Keth Var speaking from the ruins of Zephyria Prime. I am alone now, the last of my kind. My world burns and my people are gone, but I had to send this message before the end comes for me too. The recording was filled with static and long pauses where the speaker seemed to struggle for words. When Keth Var continued, his voice carried a weight of understanding that had come too late. We understand now what we could never see before. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is the constant work of choosing cooperation over conflict. It is the daily decision to build instead of destroy. You carried that burden for us for 300 years and we never thanked you. We never even recognized what you were doing. President Carter felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to the admission that humanity had waited 8 years to hear. We thought you were naive. We believed you solved conflicts through luck and simple thinking. We never realized that every solution you offered was built on centuries of careful study and deep understanding of how different species think and feel and dream. You knew us better than we knew ourselves. The transmission grew weaker as solar radiation from the dying Zephyrian system interfered with the signal. But Keth Var's final words came through clearly enough. We are sorry. Sorry for taking your sacrifice for granted. Sorry for blaming you when your solutions were not perfect. Sorry for never asking what keeping our peace cost your people. The galaxy is dying and we deserve this fate. but you did not deserve the burden we placed on you. I hope you find peace among the stars, even if we could not." The transmission ended with the sound of explosions in the background as the last Zephyrian city fell to whatever forces had conquered that ancient world. President Carter stood in the communications center and felt the weight of 8 years of isolation pressing down on her shoulders. "Madam President," General Rivera said quietly, "we are receiving similar transmissions from across the galaxy. Survivors from dozens of species are sending final messages. Most of them are apologies." Carter nodded and walked to her office, where she faced the hardest decision any human leader had ever made. On her desk lay 2 folders. One contained Admiral Sullivan's latest report on galactic conditions. The other held Dr. Peterson's proposal to deploy the Harmony engine to rebuild galactic civilization. The choice was simple in concept, but devastating in implications. Humanity could return to the galaxy as conquerors using advanced technology to force peace on species that had proven they could not maintain it themselves. Or they could continue to watch from the darkness as the last lights of galactic civilization went out forever. The decision was made for her by an unexpected source. A group of young people from Haven arrived at Earth aboard a refugee transport. They had been born on the neutral world and raised by Dr. Greg Coleman and other human volunteers who had stayed behind to document the collapse. These children represented something new in human history. They had grown up watching both humanity's burden and the galaxy's need. Their leader was 15-year-old Alex Turner, the daughter of a human diplomat who had died in the service of galactic peace. She spoke to the human assembly with a clarity that cut through 8 years of debate and doubt. "You argue about whether to return as saviors or conquerors," Alex said to the packed assembly hall. "But those are not the only choices. You can return as teachers." She activated a holographic display that showed images from Haven. Human volunteers working alongside alien refugees. Children of different species playing together in integrated schools. Scientists sharing knowledge across cultural boundaries without trying to control how that knowledge was used. "On Haven, we learned something that the old galaxy never understood," Alex continued. "Peace is not something you can give to other people. It is something you can learn together. The humans who stayed behind did not try to rule us or save us. They taught us how to think about problems differently. They showed us that cooperation was possible, but they made us choose it for ourselves." Dr. Coleman had sent video messages along with the Haven refugees. His years of isolation had aged him, but his eyes still held the spark of someone who believed in the possibility of a better future. "The children are right," Coleman's recorded message said. "We cannot save the galaxy by controlling it, but we might be able to teach it how to save itself. The survivors out there are not the same species that rejected human help 8 years ago. They have learned the price of conflict. They might finally be ready to learn the value of peace." President Carter called for a vote on 3 proposals. The first was continued isolation. The second was military intervention to impose peace through force. The third was what became known as the Teacher Protocol. Limited re-engagement focused on education and voluntary cooperation rather than control. The vote was close, but the Teacher Protocol won by a narrow margin. Admiral Sullivan opposed the decision, arguing that the galaxy was too far gone for gentle measures. Dr. Peterson supported it, but warned that progress would be slow, and many more lives would be lost before peace could take root. "We are not going back as the saviors we used to be," President Carter announced to the galaxy in a broadcast that reached every surviving communication system. "We are not coming as conquerors to impose our will. We are offering to be teachers for those who want to learn how to build peace instead of just hoping for it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Survivors from across the galaxy sent messages begging for human teachers. Species that had rejected human help for centuries now pleaded for any guidance that might help them rebuild their shattered worlds. Captain Jake Morrison's daughter, Lieutenant Commander Jenny Morrison, was chosen to lead the first return mission. She stood on the bridge of the UES New Dawn as it approached the ruins of the old Galactic Council station. The massive structure was dark and scarred by years of warfare, but its communication systems still functioned. Jenny activated the ship's broadcast system, and sent a message that would be heard on every world that still had working receivers. This is Commander Morrison of the Earthship New Dawn. We have returned not to resume the role we played before, but to offer something different. We will teach any species that wants to learn how to build peace from the ground up. But this time, peace will be your responsibility, not ours. The first to respond was a group of Aquarian survivors who had rejected the religious extremism that destroyed their collective. They had maintained a small colony on the edge of their former territory and kept alive the scientific traditions that had once made their species great. Commander Morrison, their message said, "We have children here who have never known peace. Can you teach them what their parents forgot?" Jenny smiled as she read the message. It was exactly the kind of request the teacher protocol had been designed for. "Yes," she replied, "but they will have to choose to learn it. We cannot force wisdom on anyone who does not want it." Over the following months, human teachers spread across the galaxy. They established schools on worlds that had forgotten the difference between education and propaganda. They showed survivors how to build institutions based on cooperation instead of domination. Most importantly, they made it clear that every lesson was optional and every choice belonged to the students. Many species rejected the offer. The remnants of the Corvan Empire declared that humans were weakening agents trying to destroy their warrior culture. Some hegemony survivors attacked human teachers, viewing them as threats to their new tribal hierarchies, but others began to learn. Zephyrian children who had grown up in refugee camps started schools that taught conflict resolution alongside mathematics. Young Thessians organized peace councils that mediated disputes without resorting to violence. Even some Corvan youth secretly attended human classes where they learned that strength could be measured by the ability to build rather than destroy. The progress was slow and painful. Wars still raged in many systems. Entire species remained committed to paths that led only to destruction. But in scattered schools and hidden communities across the galaxy, a new generation was learning lessons their parents had forgotten. Dr. Peterson finally deployed the Harmony engine, but not as a weapon of control. Instead, it became a teaching tool that helped human educators understand how different species learned and what cultural barriers prevented them from embracing cooperation. The device that could have enslaved the galaxy became instead its guide toward freedom. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the galaxy, and the silence from the stars was deafening. On Earth, former Galactic Peacekeeper Commander Steve Johnson stood before the human assembly and demanded action. His uniform bore the medals of 30 years of service keeping peace between species that had now forgotten what peace meant. "We cannot continue to hide while entire civilizations burn," Johnson declared to the packed assembly hall. "The Nexari are extinct. The Aquarian collective has collapsed into warring religious factions. Even the mighty hegemony is fracturing along tribal lines that have not mattered for 1,000 years. How many more species must die before we act?" The assembly listened with faces that showed the weight of 5 years of guilt and uncertainty. These were the representatives of a species that had once believed they could save the galaxy through compassion and understanding. Now they faced the reality that sometimes salvation required choices no moral being wanted to make. Dr. Rachel Wells stood to respond from her position as head of the Human Psychological Health Initiative. Her research had revealed the hidden cost of humanity's role as galactic peacekeepers. The data she carried painted a picture that challenged everything the assembly thought they knew about their past. "Commander Johnson speaks from his heart," Dr. Wells began, "but we must also speak from our minds. The Psychological Health Initiative has completed its analysis of humanity's peacekeeping era. What we found was a species slowly destroying itself to save others." She activated the holographic displays that filled the assembly hall with charts and statistics. The numbers told a story of human sacrifice that had been hidden from the general population for decades. Suicide rates among peacekeeping personnel that dwarfed any other profession. Mental health statistics that revealed an entire generation of humans who believed their lives were worth less than alien conflicts. "We documented 47,000 cases of what we now call savior syndrome," Dr. Wells continued. "Human peacekeepers who became so obsessed with preventing alien suffering that they lost the ability to value their own lives. We recorded testimony from diplomats who expressed guilt for eating meals while aliens went hungry on distant worlds. We found military personnel who volunteered for suicide missions because they believed alien lives were more important than human ones. Commander Johnson stepped forward, his voice rising with emotion. Those people died with honor, Doctor. They gave their lives for something greater than themselves. They died with mental illness, Commander, Dr. Wells replied firmly. Mental illness that we created by teaching our children that being human meant carrying everyone else's burdens. We raised generations of people who could not find meaning in their own existence unless they were suffering for others. The Assembly. Hall erupted in heated discussion. Some representatives supported Johnson's call for intervention. Others backed Dr. Wells' position that humanity needed to heal itself before it could help anyone else. The debate continued for hours with no clear resolution. In a secure facility beneath the Alps, Dr. Carl Peterson worked on a project that could change everything. The isolated laboratory had been constructed during the early days of the evacuation to develop technology that might help humanity survive in isolation. What Peterson and his team had created was something far more powerful. The device looked simple enough. A crystalline matrix no larger than a human head connected to quantum processing units that could simulate the behavior of entire civilizations. It was called the Harmony Engine, and it represented the pinnacle of human understanding of social dynamics and cultural psychology. The simulations are complete, Peterson told his research partner, Dr. Nancy Torres, as they reviewed the latest test. Results. The Harmony Engine can predict social behavior patterns with 99.7% accuracy. It can identify the exact interventions needed to prevent conflicts before they start. Dr. Torres studied the data with growing excitement and concern. Carl, this technology could revolutionize peacekeeping. We could prevent wars instead of just stopping them. We could reshape entire civilizations to eliminate the root causes of conflict. That is exactly what worries me, Peterson replied. Nancy, we would not be peacekeepers anymore. We would be gods deciding how other species should think and feel and behave. The line between helping and controlling would disappear completely. The Harmony Engine represented everything humanity had learned about maintaining galactic peace. It could analyze cultural patterns, predict social unrest, and design interventions that would guide species toward cooperation instead of conflict. It was the ultimate expression of human compassion applied through advanced technology. It was also the most dangerous weapon ever created. Peterson sent a message to Admiral Sullivan requesting permission to field test the device. The response came back within hours. Permission denied. The Admiral's message was brief and absolute. Dr. Peterson, we will not become puppet masters pulling the strings of galactic civilization. The galaxy must find its own way to peace, or it will never be real peace at all. Destroy the device. But Peterson could not bring himself to destroy something that might save billions of lives. Instead, he placed the Harmony Engine in secure storage and waited for humanity to change its mind about intervention. On Haven, Dr. Greg. Coleman received news that shattered what remained of his faith in galactic civilization. The Aquarian Collective had been the most peaceful and philosophical species in the galaxy. They were the beings who had taught humanity about quantum mechanics and dimensional mathematics. They were artists and thinkers who believed that knowledge and beauty could solve any problem. Now they were killing each other over interpretations of ancient religious texts. The message from Aquaria Prime came from Velthera, the linguist who had discovered humanity's secret files years earlier. Her words carried the weight of a species in its death throes. Dr. Coleman. Her message began, "The collective has split into 7 factions, each claiming to possess the true understanding of the deep currents. The purists believe that suffering is necessary for spiritual growth. They have banned all medical treatment and allow their children to die from preventable diseases. The Eternalists think that death is an illusion and have begun ritual suicide, believing they will transcend to a higher existence." Greg read the message with growing horror. The species that had given the galaxy its understanding of quantum physics was embracing beliefs that rejected the very concept of objective reality. "The worst faction calls itself the Human Seekers," Velthara continued. They believe that humans were divine beings sent to guide the galaxy toward enlightenment. They worship the memory of your peacekeepers and practice ritual self-sacrifice, trying to become worthy of human attention. They have built shrines to Ambassador Foster and Captain Morrison. They pray to human diplomats who died trying to help us. Greg forwarded the message to Earth with his own analysis. The galaxy is not just losing the ability to maintain civilization. It is losing the ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. These species developed interstellar travel through rational thought and scientific method. Now they are abandoning reason itself in favor of beliefs that would make medieval humans seem progressive. On Earth, President Carter received Greg's message along with similar reports from across the galaxy. The hegemony had reverted to tribal warfare using weapons that could destroy entire star systems. The Corvan Empire had embraced a military cult that worshipped death in battle. Even the stable Zephyrian Federation was fragmenting as different colonies decided that democracy was too weak for wartime. They are not just fighting wars, Carter told her advisors during an emergency cabinet meeting. They are choosing to become less than they were. Species that mastered faster than light travel are deciding that science and reason are luxuries they cannot afford. General Rivera pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy. The red zones of active conflict now covered over 60% of known space. The yellow zones of instability made up most of the rest. Only a few isolated systems remained peaceful, and those were heavily fortified worlds that had cut themselves off from galactic civilization entirely. Madam President, the rate of collapse is accelerating, Rivera reported. We estimate that within 2 years there will be no interstellar government left in the galaxy, except for Earth and the human colonies. We will be the only technological civilization remaining. And if we intervene, Carter asked, we could stop the collapse but only through total military conquest. The galaxy is too far gone for diplomatic solutions. We would have to occupy every major world and govern through martial law. Carter stared at the map for a long time before speaking. So our choices are to become conquerors, or to watch the galaxy die. Those appear to be the only options remaining, Doctor. Coleman's final message from Haven arrived that evening. His words carried the weight of a man who had spent 5 years documenting the end of galactic civilization. The beings I have studied and lived among for 30 years are not the same species they were when humanity left. War has not just killed their bodies. It has killed their minds, their culture, their ability to imagine a better future. They are not just dying. They are choosing to forget how to live. He paused the recording and looked directly into the camera.